Well, I want to welcome you to PhoneGap Day 2014, and my name is Jen Looper, and I'm here with my colleague TJ VanToll, and we are developer advocates. Hello. We are developer advocates for Telerik, where we develop experiences. Many experiences. And today we're going to introduce to you the Telerik App Builder, which is part of the Telerik Platform. And we're actually going to be able to build two complete apps if we get lucky and if I don't talk too long. So get your laptops out and get ready to create something interesting. Can you all hear me back there? You can hear me? All right. So with the Telerik App Builder, of course, you're developing cross-platform apps. Why do you need to develop cross-platform apps? I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir. This is PhoneGap Day, but there is a reason why we build cross-platform apps, and this is why. So maybe you're working for a company, a very small company like the one I just came from, and you're approached by your manager, and they need an app. Well, you start to get some specs around that. They need something that'll work on Android, something that'll work on iOS, something that needs to do special things for Samsung. If you are, in my previous company, I was the only mobile developer there. So this is not even a question. I am not going to write something in Objective-C and then redo it in Java. I need a cross-platform solution. Or what I do at night, which is basically I run my own company, and it's a mom and pop shop, except that there's no pop, it's just mom writing apps at night, So you definitely need a cross-platform solution to be able to write once and code everywhere. Run everywhere, excuse me. There is a better way. You can go ahead and use your web skills, which you've honed over many, many years, like we all have, to build a hybrid cross-platform mobile apps. And we're going to unlock some keys for you that you'll be able to use. Here's why you're going to love hybrid. You're going to write one single code base that's going to run on all platforms. You already know HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. May as well use it. Go ahead and use what you know to create something interesting that'll work on mobile. And you have access to the native APIs using plugins. With the first app we're going to build, which is the little photo uploader, you're going to use the camera function on your phone, and you're going to be able to leverage those plugins in a cross-platform fashion. You can go ahead and publish your hybrid mobile app right to the App Store, no problem. We have end-to-end solutions to help you to do that. We have plugins to help you monetize. And then if you do it right, pay a little attention to performance, users can't tell the difference. So this is terrific. So App Builder, which is part of the Telerik platform, is hybrid mobile development simplified. We give you entire developer freedom. If you like to work straight up in the command line, hardcore, you can do that. If you like to work in browser, we have very nice in-browser tools, and you can develop using those. End-to-end tooling means you start writing your code, and you can deploy it straight up to the App Store using our solutions. And all the needed services that you might want are there for you. If you need push notifications, we've got you covered. If you need data storage, sort of like parse, that sort of thing, go ahead and use our solutions. They're just as good. You can, let me just show you an example of some of our ecosystem in App Builder. We have the back-end services. We have analytics built in. There's testing, feedback, and the app prototyper, where you could quickly prototype an app and show it to your manager before something hits the fan. So we really have got some nice end-to-end solutions, and you can start leveraging them right now. So if you would please go to platform.telerik.com and just create an account for yourselves. Go ahead and sign in. And I'm going to leave this up for a little while. I see all the laptops opening. Go ahead and sign in. Let's go. Say it again. Oh, OK. You're all on the Wi-Fi is working fine, right? OK, good. Let's go ahead and sign in. So the two apps that we're going to build today, the first is a photo uploader, and the second is a grocery list app. So once you are signed in, we're going to start our first project. Everybody signed in? I'll go back. There you go. I'm going to pass this over to TJ, who is going to take on the actual workshop.
So I'm going to walk through some of these projects here, and we'd love if you followed along. Jen will actually be floating around the room, so you can just raise your hand, ask for help, and she can help you walk through, or you could just watch me go through the tutorials yourself. And this is a workshop. We have a nice small group, so feel free to interrupt me at any point if you just have any random questions about whatever, and we can tackle them right then and there. So I'll give you the URLs to these tutorials afterwards, just in case we don't get through all of them and you want to go through them in your free time. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. So as everybody, when you create a new Telerik Platform account, you kind of already get launched into our tutorial experience. So some of you may be at that screen. If that's not you, you can go ahead and go to this icon up here and click to start the Quickstart lesson, which is the first one that we're going to be walking through. So if everybody could go ahead, and if you've created a tutorial, you already get thrown into this screen. If not, you can go ahead and click this button to get started. And what this is actually doing is this is spinning up a new App Builder project for you. So App Builder, I like to personally think of App Builder as power tools for Cordova. You're building Cordova apps, but we give you a lot of tooling to make that process easier. Now you can interact with App Builder projects in a bunch of different ways. You can use our CLI, we have Visual Studio integrations, a couple other things as well. But we also have a browser experience, which is going to look like your traditional IDE. It's an IDE that kind of lives in the cloud. But it's pretty self-explanatory. File navigator, you have your code here. And then you have some specific tools to do things like build your apps, do builds for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, run in our dedicated simulators. We have version control kind of baked into the product. And you can publish apps to the App Store, and we have little helper functionality to do that as well. So the actual tutorial here gets displayed in the left-hand side of the screen here, and we'll be kind of walking through this, and I'll kind of guide through what's happening here. And again, I'd love if you could follow along with this and keep going, walking through these instructions, and let me know if you have any questions. Now, App Builder, it helps you build these Cordova apps, but it really doesn't care about which library you use. If you want to build a Ionic app, that's great. If you want to use CandoUI Mobile, which is a Telerik tool, we'd love if you do that as well. We default to CandoUI Mobile because it's kind of our thing. It's a library that we maintain. If you want to use jQuery Mobile, you want to use anything else, feel free. So the Quickstart tutorial here generates this little baseline set of markup here, but there's not much to it. The first step here is actually going to say to create a view, and I don't know if you can see this, so let me bump up the font size at least a little bit. Now, if you're familiar with jQuery Mobile at all, CandoUI Mobile will probably feel fairly familiar to you. Yeah. Yeah. You should see the file right here, and you should be able to double-click that to open it up. And then the code to copy and paste in here for the view should be in the left column here. So this creates a CandoUI Mobile view. If you're familiar with jQuery Mobile, this is something that CandoUI Mobile borrows pretty heavily, at least the concept of organizing your apps into views and to mark up your apps with these data dash whatever attributes. So for instance, this data dash role tells CandoUI Mobile that this div should act as a navbar. This data dash role says this should show the title of the view. The next step here actually says to take the view and add a data dash title attribute. So I'm going to do that now. Toss this in here and save this file. So to actually see what this project looked like, I could deploy it to my device, but I'm actually going to start with our simulators. So we have these simulators available for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. And what the simulators do is they mock a bunch of Cordova features. So if you're using Cordova APIs, they'll mock those out for you. You can even input values with things like this location tab, network. Like if you wanted to say, let's see what my app looks like if I were standing in the middle of Detroit. You could do that, for instance. But for now, I just wanted to show how this thing looked. Remember that we just have a basic view at this point, and all we did was create a title for this div by giving it a data-title attribute. And you can see that Kendo UI takes this and gives it a pretty decent starting look automatically, just tosses it on the top of the screen. One other cool thing, the simulator will automatically update as you make changes. It's a little harder when you have one screen, but if I make a change here and run it back in the simulator will stay up and keep updating. So if you're at home with your multi-monitor setup, you can have the simulator on one screen, your laptop on the other, see your changes rendered live. Everybody get through that okay? Any other questions about this before I move on? So it's pretty simple, right? But it's very basic layout. Very basic layout. So now we're going to make this do something a little more, a little cooler. So I'm going to take this view and replace this markup here. Toss this in here. This UI also has a keyboard shortcut, Control Option or Control Alt F will auto format your code for you, just in case you get annoyed at the formatting differences here. So Kendo UI Mobile has these data-role attributes that you can use to configure widgets and elements within your interface, but there's also imperative JavaScript APIs that you can use to create these widgets as well. So that's what I'm going to use with this images element here. So you can take this view, paste it in to get the updated version here of index.html. I'm going to save this and then head into my applications JavaScript, which is in this app.js file. So I'm going to then take this piece of code here, paste it in, and I'll explain what this is doing. So I said with Kendo UI Mobile, there's two ways that you can declare widgets. You can use the data-star attributes to configure them, but you can also use the series of jQuery plugins that we provide as part of the library. So in this case, I'm taking that images element, which was a UL added to the index.html. I'm saying turn this into a Kendo list view, use its data source, so the data that this list view has access to. I'm passing it just a hard-coded list of image paths, which are sitting in this images folder here. And a template, which at the moment is just saying, spit out an image tag for the source, use the individual string that appears in this data source. And when I run this thing, I now have a list of images. Now, this is pretty basic, but Kendo UI Mobile does some stuff for you automatically. For instance, it'll make the it's implementing scrolling here in JavaScript for performance reasons. It's going to make it possible to implement things like pull to refresh, tap to add more. Kendo UI Mobile also has the concept of a virtual DOM, so it'll automatically manage the size of your DOM for you. Now in this case, this is a very simple list of images, so we're not running into those sort of optimizations, but that's the sort of thing this widget makes possible as you get into more complex use cases. So, still pretty simple though. We have a very basic layout. We now have a list of images that is showing up on the screen. Everybody still with me? People want to follow along? Any other questions at this point? Nothing else? Are you with me? Are people testing this going along? Yes? Okay. Yes, feedback. Okay. So step 3, and this is where it gets kind of fun. So what we're going to do is get this app and put it on our mobile devices. Now, unfortunately, right before, literally 2 days ago, we had a bug with our iOS app. So if you have an iOS device, unfortunately, you will not be able to complete this step and get this app on your device. But if you have an Android device, I'd encourage you to look for App Builder in Google Play. And you can do it if you are a Windows Phone user. Any Windows Phone users in this room? So one user. So you can look up in the Windows Phone Store, we have the App Builder app in there as well. And I'm going to bring up my screen of my Android device here. Let's not make it epic huge. So you can see this icon here. I already have the companion app installed for App Builder. Now, if you are familiar with the PhoneGap developer app, our app for App Builder is actually somewhat similar. We think it does a couple other cool things. But basically, we give you a way of deploying your app to our companion app through our interface. And you can also do this through our CLI as well. So what I can do is say, run this app, run a build for Android, and select the companion app option. And what this is going to do when I run it is give me a QR code that I can scan on my device. So I'm going to do that. And what this will do is it'll launch this app that we're developing in the companion app. Just take a second here to load. Anybody get the app available, get it downloaded on their device? Again, I'm sorry for iOS users. We had a bug that we had to pull the app from the store temporarily, and we're waiting. We're unfortunately waiting for Apple's approval to get it pushed back in the device, which some of you may be familiar with what that process is like. What we're going to do, so I have the app up on my device here. And the next cool feature, close this, is that I can actually make changes to this application. So I'm going to go in here and update this data-title, make it awesome photos. Save this change. And then I'm going to do what this little picture shows here, this little 3-finger refresh. And switch to my device here. And remember, I changed the title from photos to awesome photos. And what we should see here in a second, if the Wi-Fi chooses to cooperate, is the changes will get synced down and the title will update. It's syncing the entire app at the moment. It's actually, we're hoping for our next release, we're going to be a little more intelligent about it. It's normally fairly snappy, like it's normally sub-second if you're on a fast connection. It's a little sluggish here because of the Wi-Fi. But on big apps, it has been problematic for us. We've had some people building like 30 meg apps where it's just like, I think our release that's coming out later, actually it might even be releasing today, we're gonna have the concept of a blacklist so you can at least tell it, like, don't sync these files. And then long term, we're working on making it really intelligent to say, like, basically different timestamps or whatever the case. But it's somewhat stupid at the moment. So how are we doing? People have luck trying this out? Following along? Slowly? Do you need more time? Okay. So this is kind of cool. You can also, like, if you have multiple devices around for testing, you can wire up your iOS, Android, Windows Phone devices, set them up so that you can change push these or refresh your apps as you make changes to them. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step of this. So the next thing we're going to do in this app, so we have this static list of images, but I want to make it so that we can add new images to this list. So I'm going to grab this button here and add it to this project's nav bar. Now remember, I said that ChemDUI Mobile, you can use data attributes to mark up things. So saying this is a button, which just basically tells ChemDUI Mobile to style this and to align it on the right-hand side of the nav bar. And just fire this up quickly. Show that I now have an add button that does absolutely nothing. The next thing I'm going to do is make this do something. So I'm going to add a little bit of code here to my JavaScript. Control-Option-F to format this. Save it. I'm going to go ahead and make these changes, and then I will explain what I'm doing. Data-model equals view. And then the last change I have to do is grab this button. Okay, so I did 3 different things there. The first is I put this block of code in this app.js, which created a Kendo observable, which Kendo UI Mobile has this concept of MVVM, or two-way data binding, baked into the library. And it's based off what is available in Kendo UI. It kind of builds on top of that. So what I'm doing is I'm defining a single add image function, which is going to get a reference to my Kendo mobile list view and just prepend another static image path to it. Now, the next thing I have to do is wire up so every time that button is clicked, this add image function actually fires. So I did 2 things here. In the view itself, I'm tying the view to that model with this data model attribute. This if you're familiar with Angular at all, this will probably feel fairly Angular-esque, where basically I'm using this data model to scope my data binding. So data model list view ties to this list view element available here, so that things within that view get scoped. And then for the button itself, I'm saying, okay, bind clicks on this button to that add image method, which is scoped to this list view object. So that when I run this thing back in the simulator again, I click the add button and I get that static image added to the top. And it's kind of stupid at the moment, so I could just keep adding this thing over and over again, and I continue to build a giant list of snow. Anybody have any questions about how this works? Yeah, sure. And it's now showing you. Do you take a look, Jen? Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions about the app, anything that I put into this point? Okay. I'm going to give her 1 more minute and then move on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get going. As I mentioned before, if you want to go back through this later, it's available through this icon here. You can click this and fire through these lessons. And we're actually, there's one of these lessons, it's plural, but there's only one at the moment. We're going to have 3 more that are being released. We're hopefully next week, if not the week after. So more tutorials that can help walk you through some stuff in the platform. So the next thing we're going to do is take this add image function and actually make it take use of the device features. So let's make it use the camera instead. So take add image out, Control Option F to format this thing. And now what I'm going to do is make it call this Cordova navigator.camera.getPicture API to take a picture and to use that to append that to the top of the list. So I'll show how this works first, and then I'll come back and talk about the code a little bit more. So I'll go back to my device, use my 3-finger refresh to pull down changes. Now I should mention that App Builder actually gives you an interface for managing Cordova plugins. And this same functionality is available in our CLI as well. Well, the Cordova, yes, the Cordova plugins themselves are the same, but the actual implementations, like there's an implementation of each on each of the platforms. Yes. Yeah, so it depends on the specific situation. Like I can't speak necessarily to email, but the idea behind Cordova in general is to kind of abstract that away from you so that the implementations of the plugins on the different platforms are completely different, but that you are abstracted from it and you get a JavaScript API for interacting with it. Like for here, for instance, under the hood of Cordova, there's different implementations to tie into the actual iOS, Android, Windows Phone, etc. APIs, but you can just call a method. And there's plugins that do that sort of thing for email as well. So I think I have the app here, so I'm going to go ahead and take a picture so everybody here can smile because I'm taking a picture right now. Let's accept that. And now I'm getting that photo on the top of this list. So I'm going to go back to the code for a second to show what just happened here. So again, this is the actual Cordova call, this navigator.camera.getPicture. I'm passing this thing three functions. A success callback, which the success callback does the code we looked at before. The only thing different is that instead of that hard-coded image path I was using before, I'm now telling it this is actually a base 64 encoded path. And as part of my config, this last variable here, I'm telling Cordova, capture these bytes as a data URL so that I can use it in this image tag here. Then I'm also passing some dimensions to keep some devices from taking like 20 megapixel images. So that's the general idea. Does anybody have any questions about how this works? Any other questions, troubles getting this working? Yeah. So, yeah, good question. So on App Builder, and let me see if I can get this dimensions right. So one of the things we do, yeah, there we go, that's a little bit better. One of the things we do is default to having all of the core Cordova plugins added to your project automatically. Oops. Oh, there we go. So we add things like, here's the camera one specifically, but all the 15 or 16 of them are just there by default, just for convenience sake. Now, once you get to the point where you want to deploy this app like in a production setting, it makes sense to go through and like uncheck the ones that you're not using. It cuts down on like the file size of your app and build times and those type things. But for simple things getting started, we just default to everything on. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. The versions of them? That is a good question. We baked into the project we have, let me see. So basically we use the latest ones by default, or at least the latest ones per updates. There's a configuration file that you can override this, and I have to get back to here. Yeah, somewhere in the properties file, it's basically more of an advanced configuration that we give you the latest by default, but that you can override it if you need to. Yes, we do. They are determined by default, yes. Like we basically test them out ourselves and say like we are going to use this version of the plugin, and then as we update the app builder, we update the versions we use. But yes. So in case people didn't hear that, so basically every time we release App Builder, we take what's likely the latest version in the registry, bring it in, validate that it works with an App Builder, and then specify it. But we do give you the ability to override and use whatever you want, but it's kind of more of a hidden feature that. Of Cordova? Yeah, so that is, yeah, it's configurable here. So as of right now, we're doing 3.5. I think we're releasing, our release that's happening later, I think next week is gonna bump it up to 3.6, and then we're starting to toy with 4.0. So we try to keep up to date, but we're usually a little bit behind just to verify all of our stuff is working and such. This specific Android 3.5.1 thing is because there was a security issue in 3.5.1, so we had to patch that up pretty quickly, or at least provide it through our release pretty quickly. Yep, so you can import any custom plugins. We have this ability here. We have a quick toggle for some common ones like Telerik. We have some other services that we have plugins for, and that's mostly what this is here. We also have, I should show, basically you take the, just a second, I'll show you on here. So we have this verified plugins marketplace. So you can use any Cordova plugin out there. It'll work within App Builder. So you can go to plugins.cordova.io. But we have a special set of plugins that basically we've verified, we've documented, taken screenshots of and put available. So if you head to plugins.telerik.com, you can try them out. And there's even a button to just try it in App Builder. So it'll load up a project that has that plugin loaded so you can give it a go. Then we have instructions. So basically this is the answer to how you do it within the IDE. So I'll just show it live real quick. So you have the app, you can go to manage packages, and you can do things like there's Bower integration if you want to grab other libraries, you want to grab Ionic or whatever. There's the plugins marketplace as well, so if I wanted to install Action Sheet, I would go there and just click install, and that would install it. That import button you were seeing was more like if you downloaded something from plugins.cordova.io, then you would use that to import it into your project. Yep. All right, so let me close out of this. So that's plugins. Right now, this is just using the camera plugin here. Did anybody have any other questions about this before I move on? Okay. So let's see. So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of step outside of App Builder. Everything I've shown here is App Builder functionality. It's functionality that's also available via our CLI, via our Visual Studio extension. But we also have the Telerik Platform, which if I jump out to my account here, I can show you, that lets you create a bunch of other services. So Jen talked about this. We have a backend as a service offering. We have an analytics offering. And all of these are kind of bridged together with the Telerik Platform. So here we have this concept of workspaces, which are really just kind of like folders. And there's a folder that gets created for this photo album app when you start up the Quickstart tutorial. And really the reason we have workspaces is we have this concept of teams. So you can do things like invite your coworkers, invite your friends to work on your app. You can set permissions, so you can tell your friend they can edit it, but they don't have admin access of your account. So that you can develop your apps with multiple people and it's not just you. They also have to create an account. So basically if you invited just somebody with a random email address, they would basically be told like you have to log in with your Telerik Platform account. Now there is different, like they don't necessarily have to be a paid user. Like if you go to our pricing page, it kind of lays out, like that's one of the things that happens in the different tiers. Like you can invite so many more people to your account. So I can show the pricing page later that kind of lays that out in more detail. So what I'm going to do for this app, so we have these photos, right? But they're just photos that are just chilling in that app. They're just in an images folder. So what I want to do now is show how we can take those pictures we just took on our device and just store it in the cloud in our backend as a service here. So all these boxes correspond to a different service that lives within the Telerik Platform. So as I mentioned, we have analytics, mobile testing, prototyping, some other things. But My favorite, or the one that's most pertinent here, is this backend services project, which I'm going to create now. I'm going to give this thing a name, like photo backend, and go ahead and create this. Now this gives you all the various things. You'll see a menu here in a second that shows all the various things you can do with our backend as a service. The primary thing, and I think the thing people most associated with this type of thing, is more or less a database in the cloud. So with this type system we'll be looking at in a minute, you can basically configure database tables, database columns, and get an API that's more or less available for you automatically. You get user management, which we'll get into in a minute. But for our purposes at the moment, all I'm going to use is just use this simple files content type, which is basically a place I can chuck files into that my app may need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my API key here, because I'm going to need this in a minute. And just store it in a tab there. Close some of this stuff out. Huh? This is like, yeah, because like, so back in the day when I used to work on Windows, like I had Notepad, but I'm not satisfied with any of the alternatives on OS X. So, no, I don't do stickies. You love stickies? I can't. No. This is very pertinent. So save off the API key, and then what I'm going to do is, let's see. So I'm going to step back to my App Builder project here, back to the photo album. I'm going to grab our SDK. So when you do any of these things, when you do set up these content types, set up files or whatever, we have SDKs that are available in multiple different languages. So you can share your stuff between your native iOS, native Android apps, your .NET app, as well as this JavaScript SDK for any of your hybrid Cordova apps. So I'm going to toss in our SDK here, not the API key. Let's try that again. So our JavaScript SDK, which confusingly enough we codename Everlive, and for whatever reason we propagate that up. Anyways, so it's called Everlive. You don't know the number of questions I get that people have no idea why it's called Everlive, because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go back into my JavaScript, set up an Everlive instance. This is where I need my API key that I generated here. And this is basically all you need to set up the SDK. So Everlive, or our backend services, needs to know who you are. It needs to know the API key. But then you give this series of methods, this API that you can interact with, that goes directly to that backend service. So what I'm going to do here is I have this success function defined, and I'm going to change it up a little bit. That instead of just this prepending the image that got taken, I'm going to call everlive.files.create, which takes a couple of properties. The first is a file name, which I don't really care about the file name here, so I'm just generating some random garbage. I'm telling it that I'm uploading a JPEG, and that this is base 64 data. You'll recall that we told Cordova that we want a data URL back from the getPicture API. So that sets up this on create. The other thing I have to do is, so this will add it to the list, but I also want to change that list so when this app loads, I grab the pictures that have already been stored in the back end. So that's what this code is here. And I'm going to grab this, take this list view here, format this up. Now what this is saying is go grab the files from backend services, get anything that's already out there. Once you've got them, more or less, all this is saying is throw these into the list view. I think this is probably easier to show again. So give this a second while this loads up. So when this loads, if I did everything correctly, the list is now empty because I said to, instead of having those hard-coded paths in my data source, I'm now saying go ahead and grab those from backend services, grab them and then use that as part of the list. So to switch back, I'm going to click the add button here. And this time I'm going to take like a very hipster artsy photo of this bottle here. There we go. Beautiful. Upload this. Now, if I did everything correctly, it should show up on the top of the list. Uh-oh. Let's see if it works from the simulator. So I mentioned earlier, our simulators mock out Cordova calls for you, so they provide basically whatever is most appropriate. So if you have a file upload, or if you're doing the camera, we at least give you the ability to upload a file to kind of mock out that camera upload. So I'm going to see if, let's see, I'll upload a picture of me. So that seemed to have worked. So to see if it actually was persisted, I'm going to refresh this. Yep, it was. I'll have to look at what went wrong in the device there. But what's cool about this, so I'm going to head over to another tab, load up the backend services here. Check out the files. And you can see that file that I just uploaded here. I'm not, however, sure what went wrong on the device here because that file is not listed. It looks like it might have been a Wi-Fi issue. Let's try this one more time. There we go. Yeah, my phone lost the Wi-Fi temporarily for some reason. But see, now I have the bottle as well as me. And then if I head back here and refresh, should see, yep, there's the bottle here. So pretty cool. I find this very exciting because especially if you just want to rig up a quick and dirty app, like I don't want to spin up a server and configure a database on it because I have better things I'd prefer to be doing with my life. So this is really quite convenient for doing that sort of thing. You need a very quick database, you need a place to store files, you need a place to configure some users, log into your service. It can be pretty handy for that sort of thing. I'd have to get back with you on it. I don't want to say anything that's not true. We are using some service. I don't remember if it's S3 or Rackspace, but yep, yeah, you should be able to. And feel free to, if you have more specific questions, you can ask me later and I can get you specific answers. I just don't want to say anything I'm not positive. But we're not storing the images like on our servers. We're using other services to do that. Yeah. There are, actually, let me bring that up now. So we consider data storage as kind of a separate thing. So basically here's your data plans available here. So if you have a Telerik Platform subscription, you get a gig free, but then we have other data plans for larger amounts. The data services plans are kind of a la carte. They are a la carte. Yep. Yep, analytics are a la carte as well. And since the question came up before with users, I actually don't see it here. I know it's something related to that, but I can look that up later. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So, okay, just to go over these sequentially, everybody gets a 30-day free trial of the platform. So if you signed up and create an account, absolutely everything is free for 30 days, no limits or anything. So what this native UI is talking about is that Telerik also produces native UI controls for Android, iOS, and Windows Phone. And so if you buy the higher tiered account, we also give you access to our native controls as well. No, like native iOS, native Android, native Windows Phone. Kendo is actually completely separate. So Kendo UI Mobile is free and open source, so anybody can use it and do whatever. Kendo UI Professional is something outside of the scope of the platform. Yeah, it's confusing messaging. It's more that you have access to the native UI, but you wouldn't necessarily use those UI elements as part of your apps. It's more that if you're a company that produces native apps and Cordova apps, that by buying the higher tier, you have access to the native UI elements. Correct. And we have, like, if you've heard of, we're working on a project called Native Script as well. That's kind of write in JavaScript and deploy to native platforms it's going to tie into that as well. So some of that is coming soon. It's somewhat similar. Similar. Yeah. Play on words. So any other questions on this tutorial? This is actually the last part of this one. We can move on to the other one next. Yeah. So you have, are they existing Cordova apps? So you can just basically import them straight in. It's just, like, what lives in here is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So basically you'd have to take your existing web code, just port it in, like we have, like you can import, like if you have a zip file of your app, you could kind of toss it in. The Cordova plugins, you'd kind of have to migrate. Like if you're using any custom Cordova plugins, you'd have to go through this interface and import those in as well. But it's more or less like if you have a Cordova app, you should be able to import it in. There's no wizard to necessarily like walk you through it automatically, but you could import everything in and get it up and running. The folder structure actually does matter, and in our CLI, correct. There's a folder structure that App Builder depends on in order to use. Yes, and we do some from the CLI. We have this concept of a .ab project where you can configure some of these things to tell App Builder like how to build it. You don't see this through the web graphical interface, but you can kind of use the .ab project to kind of do some more advanced configuring of things. So. Correct. So these files are living in the cloud, but you can push them off to a Git repository if you wanted to interact with other people so that you could use any other editor. We have the CLI, so if you don't, I don't use this interface all that much because I don't like coding in a browser, so I use the CLI pretty much exclusively, but I do kind of use this interface sometimes because let me show, sometimes just having a UI is nice. Like we give you little helpers to do things like upload icons and splash screens, which is a complete pain in the ass in my opinion. We'll even do things like, this is like the stupidest little feature, but we'll even do things like if you update if you upload a 500 by 500 pixel image, we'll resize it to the appropriate dimensions for you. It's just such a silly little feature, but yeah. Yeah. I actually love, we're just about to update to have iOS 8 image dimensions in here, because that's one of the reasons we're doing this update. But I just like to look through here and look at the crazy number of dimensions. Like this is just for iOS. This isn't even Android and Windows Phone. And the fact that there's like 12 different boxes on here. Yeah. Yeah, Android just has this, and Windows Phone has their own thing as well. But yeah.
For the designers in the room, when you extract Photoshop CC, it automatically generates those things for you. You can set it up to generate any precise amount. So you have to control the borders.
Oh, that's really cool. Extract and Photoshop. Do they keep that up to date too? Like, would that know like iOS 8 has different dimensions and such?
So you set your own dimensions to what you want, and then it will auto-generate them. Every time you make any change to it whatsoever, it will auto-save it.
Okay. Very cool. Yep. So it is a public repo. So like basically the things I work on are like just demo apps, so it doesn't matter. But thinking of like the private, so we integrate with GitHub. So if you had private GitHub repos, it'll work with that. I think, I can't tell you this for sure, but I think with like Bitbucket, we'll support it as well. The Git repo has to be somewhere available. So like we'll prompt you for credentials when you try to access it, but it has to be somewhere public, obviously. But if you have that private repo, you should be able to connect to it, because we have this, basically you can configure a remote repository. So we make it easy for GitHub, but if you have a Git provider that's publicly available, you have the ability to connect to it. Yeah. So any other questions? Now I have one more app I was going to go through. Okay. So the other app, this is one that we are going to, let me put the URL up here. So I have this tutorial available at bit.ly.pg-day-2 if you want to just fire that up or write it down or whatever. Now this tutorial is going to be fully available within our interface probably next week sometime, so you're getting a little bit of an early preview. But right now you don't have the nice graphical way of doing it with this, so it's just basically a GIST available on GitHub. This is just a vanity URL to get to it. So I'll leave that there. So what I'm going to do in part of this tutorial is show off a little bit more of what the backend services makes available in terms of user management, registration, login screen, all that type of stuff. And the app is actually a grocery list app. So I'm going to back up here, close this out, create a new workspace. And I think I'm going to try to go through this one, at least the boilerplate of it, somewhat quickly so that I can get through this. And then, as I said, if you want to go through this later on in your own time, please do. So I'm going to clone this repository, call it grocery list, create this up. So it'll take a second to load. I'm also going to create a backend services project for this as well. Grocery backend. See how well I remember this. So what I'm going to do is build a little grocery list app. And the main thing you need for a grocery list app is a place to store your list. So I'm going to create a content type. And I like to think of content types as tables in the relational databases that I know. And then these fields here are columns, more or less, that you can configure. So I'm going to create a groceries table that has a name field. Add that. Save it off so I have a groceries content type here I can manage. I'm going to add a few items because I'm going to start by just loading up a list. So I'm going to need to get some get bananas, apples, get some bread as well. So I'll get this list loaded. So I will head back to the app here. Open my app up. I'm going to get my JavaScript open as well. So I'm going to need to grab my API key. This is the same type thing we ran into earlier. Now I mentioned that some of these platform projects, they're kind of separate entities, but they're somewhat integrated together. So for instance, you can get at your data directly from within App Builder here. So I have my grocery backend, and I can actually grab the API key directly from here. Put this in here. And if I did this correctly, I should see my grocery list. Nope. I think I probably missed an instruction. So, oh, yep, and then I need this. So I'm going to see if I actually get some groceries here, and then I'll explain what I just did. So there's my list here. Now, the way this code works, the layout and such is similar to what we were using in the last example. The real magic actually happens here. So I'm configuring a data source, and you may remember from the last example, I was just using a hard-coded list of images. But the Kendo UI data source gives you a lot of flexibility to tie into pretty much any service that you have accessible over HTTP. So when I created that groceries content type, it generated, I should say, it was automatically made available at this RESTful URL structure. So api.everlive.com needs to know your API key, and then this is for the content type that we got. So I'm telling Kendo UI that basically this is how I read groceries. I read them from this URL, and I'm going to expect data back as JSON-P. And you can do things like XML, any other thing that you're coming up with. The schema part here just is basically telling Kendo UI, you have to tell it how it's formatted. It's going to want an array back, and in this case, the JSON response comes back with a bunch of metadata, and then the actual data itself, or is in an array called result. So this is just telling Kendo UI Mobile more or less how to format this data. Then all I have to do is for this list view, same basic list view used in the last example, that I want to use this data source. So Kendo UI Mobile, for instance, then automatically knows when this view loads, go ahead and grab that data, do the read, which will invoke this URL to grab the groceries and build that list of groceries there. Yeah, like we're going to post data in a minute. Sockets? I can't give you a good answer to that. I know we have some things with Kendo UI where they'll use like the Signal R, like the .NET thing where it'll do like real-time data. So in terms of sockets specifically, I don't know. I'd have to look into it. Okay. For the API key? So that's an excellent question. I'll address that in just a minute. More or less, like you can't totally, like in any hybrid or any JavaScript app, you can't totally avoid exposing that API key. Like it's necessary. But what you can do is in the content types in the back, control basically access points. So you can allow things available for read access, but basically ensure that people have to be authenticated in order to do more. Yes, and we're going to set that, hopefully we have time, we'll set up some of that for this app as well. So that was that, and actually the next thing I'm going to add here is post functionality. So I'm going to take the project's nav bar here. toss in an add button, save that off. I'm going to create a brand new view here. And again, I'm going to get this in here and then explain what this is doing. So I'm going to show this off in action first and then explain how this is working. So with the changes I just pasted in, I have the ability now to add groceries directly within the app. Hopefully. I might have missed something. Oh, yeah, it worked. For some reason, I might have missed some code that closes out the dialog. But basically what I did here is I added another view. I mentioned that KendaUI mobile apps are basically organized by throwing them into views. In this case, I'm telling KendaUI mobile that this is a modal view, so that's what made it pop up on top of the screen. But you still use you can use normal web navigation. If you've used jQuery mobile before, this might feel familiar, where you can link to a dialog by just a normal href, which KendaUI mobile knows to automatically open this dialog up. For the rest of this, I'm using KendaUI mobile's data binding. So I'm having this data model attribute here, which is going to correspond to this add view member or this add view variable that I have configured in my JavaScript, which lets me scope then functions to say add, which I have tied it to the submit of the form, and close to close out this application. Now, where the magic actually happens in terms of syncing the data source is right here. Well, actually, so this says, take that data source that I configured, where I configured the transport and such. And actually, I think I know, I missed one step, and I think I know what it is now. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to run it until I did this. So I showed this earlier because I wanted to show that with KendaUI Mobile, you can configure to really any data source that is available, but we actually have helpers available for our own backend services project, in that if you configure it with a type of Everlive, it kind of knows the URL structure so that you don't have to manually specify all that stuff. And all you have to do is tell it, in this case, I'm dealing with the groceries type name, and that's all it needs to know to generate the rest. So now, if I run this thing, and I click the right thing, hopefully this will work this time. There we go. So it added the grocery to the list, and if I head back to my types here, oops, I'm in the wrong project. Back to grocery list app, head back into my backend service, head to types, groceries, I can see that item got added there. So the data source has that configured so that I didn't have to tell it how to post data to it. All I had to do was, in my method here, say call add, and don't do that. Call add, and then call sync. And sync kind of does an intelligent diff and figures out what it needs to push back to the backend, which in this case is it'll send a post to the Everlive API to add that item to the list. So the next part of this tutorial, first of all, does anybody have any questions at this point with what I've shown here? So the next thing I'm going to do, so a grocery list app is not a whole lot of fun without the concept of user accounts. You don't really want people to just have this global grocery list to add. So I want to show how you can use the backend services to do that sort of thing. And I think we have, what time does this workshop end at? It's half an hour still? Okay, we should have time to get through that. Okay, so the next part of this, to go back to functionality here, I have one example of here of like the data source makes some kind of fun things possible once you're using that abstraction. You could do things like, say, tell it how to sort it, you can tell it how to filter, that sort of thing. But I won't go into that into too much detail here. The next thing I'm going to do is deal with permissions, actually. So permissions and users. So let's head back. This is my tab for the account here. So we have this concept of users within the Telerik platform, and I'm going to add a completely dummy one right now. So I will be user at password. I'm very secure here. So we'll look at how to add true user registration in the app, but I need a dummy one just to get started here. I'm going to save this just so I have this user available. Now I'm going to head back to my groceries type here, and if I click this little lock, which is permissions here, you can see that this is currently configured as a completely public repository. But that's not really what I want. So I have the ability to change this thing up. Like I could make this read only, like if I just had some data that I just read within my app. I can make it role-based, so you can configure things like I have admin users and non-admin users. But in this case, all I really want to do is make it private, which basically scopes it to user accounts. It says you have to be authenticated, and you only really manage your own entities of this content type. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I head back to look at this type, so this won't look any different at the moment, but now if I go back to my app and try to run this thing, I'm on Wi-Fi. Basically what I'm going to show when this loads is that when I try to run it, now that I've changed the permissions on this, it's going to actually give me a 403 error. It's going to tell me that I can't access the groceries list type unless I authenticate. The Wi-Fi is not cooperating. Let's try one more time. It's a custom one that we built, so it's not Ripple. And it's running off the network, so. With the CLI, we have a dedicated one that you can run offline so that you're not dependent on the network, but I'm not using that one at the moment. Anybody else having trouble with the network, by the way, by chance? Like a couple times? Okay. Well, we'll see if other things are working as well. I haven't had any other issues to this point. So basically, now that I've changed how that's configured, you have to be authenticated into a user account in order to interact with that content type. So now I'm going to take that dummy user account that I created and basically do a hard-coded login to show how I can associate groceries with that user's account. So I have a little bit of code here. I will take this hard-coded login and toss it in my initialize function, which is back here. Save that. And this will be hard to show unless the simulator works for me. What's that? Ah, good catch. So what's weird is that it seems to be saving for me, but the simulator just does not want to load. So let me try one other thing. I will try this out again. Because this one will be a little harder to continue without being able to show. I don't know why the simulator is flaking out on me, but let's see if my Android device is going to work for me. So now I have that hard-coded login, so I should be able to add a grocery, and it looks like it worked. So assuming that did what I hope it did, I should be able to go back to my back end, refresh, give it a second. Yep, so there's the new grocery, it worked. But what's interesting here is if you compare this grocery compared to the other ones in the list, you can see that it has a tie now to that user, so it knows who created it, who is the owner of it. So if I tried to log in with another account, I don't have access to this user's list of groceries, which is kind of important for any sort of app like this. So that's that step. That's the bottom here. The next step, we're going to look into building a login and registration screen to tie into this. So does anybody have any questions before we get into that? No? Okay. So hard-coded users accounts, not good. You don't really want to deploy that. So I'm going to take this login view, head back to my project, and plop this thing on top. So ChemUI Mobile has configuration for this sort of thing. Basically, you can set an initial property to tell it which view should be the view to load up with. But if you don't pass that, it'll just take the one that it sees first, the one on top. So in this case, I'm just pasting in this login view. And I am going to grab this code for the login view. I am going to find the hard-coded login. There it is. Get rid of this so that I'm no longer hard-coding credentials in my application, and paste in the login view. That's really all there is to this. So this will probably look familiar at this point. I have a new view. I'm tying it to my backend JavaScript with this data-model attribute. I'm also binding, in this case, just utilizing the two-way data bindings, tying my inputs to my, my JavaScript here as well, which gives me a little nice syntax to be able to check it. It's kind of Angular-esque if you do Angular stuff. And telling it when I click the login button, go ahead and submit. The submit will actually kick off this el.users.login, el being a reference to that same Everlive object that we've been looking at this point, saying do the login. When the login is done, navigate the user back to the list, remembering that the login is now the starting point, and then read the groceries. And so, we'll see if the demo gods continue to be with me today. Refresh this. I also get the lovely honor of typing in a username password on my phone in front of people. Should take a second. Try the simulator one more time while this is running. Yay, now it works. So, user, password, login, and I have that one grocery that I added before. And now that I'm logged in, I can add other ones. It's a silly grocery, but I can add that to my list as well. So all of this, again, just to kind of summarize, gets boiled down into a nice little feature, or a nice little method call, which is kind of nice. Anybody that's implemented this user management stuff before knows that it's not fun to have to get into the nitty-gritty of doing this sort of thing. So I have a login. The opposite of a login is having a log out, which is the next feature I'm going to toss in here. And so I'm going to take my list view, and all I'm doing with this block of code is adding a logout button. So I have a data align equals right button. That's the add button that's on the top right of the screen. All that paste added was a logout button that's on the left-hand side of the nav bar. And then I need to make that login button actually do something. So I'm going to grab yet another block of code here to use as a Kendo observable that ties into the two-way data binding for the list view. So I have on that logout button, it's tied to this method here, which just calls el.users.logout, and then navigates me back to the login screen. So just to show that again as well. So log in with my hard-coded credentials. I can log back out, and that gives me that workflow back and forth. So again, pretty straightforward, but to really show off how this feature works, we need to go to the next level of user management and actually let people register within this application. You'll find that the workflow is actually kind of similar. All I'm going to do here is paste in a new view, paste in a new observable tag as the data model for that view, and call another Everlive method, register, to actually register this user account. So this one is a little bit bigger just because I have a couple form fields, but it's still pretty straightforward. I'll show this off momentarily. Let's just put here if it matters. So this form needs 3 things in order to authenticate people, or in order to register a user: email address, username, and password. And then I'm going to add a link to this register screen on the login screen, because the login screen is the default, so I want to give people an ability to get to the register screen. And then I'm going to take my data model here. Let's put it over here. So this will probably look fairly familiar. I'm tying into a submit function here, doing a little bit of really silly, simple validation, but the core of it is just a simple method call again. Just everlive.users.register. I pass it the username and password, and then I get callbacks for if this works and if it doesn't. So if it does work, at the moment I'm just taking the user back to the login screen. I probably could be a little bit smarter here and just automatically log them in and send them to the list, but being fairly straightforward here. So that should work if I head back to the emulator here. So now I'm going to create an account. Try my Gmail this time. I'll be user 2 to mix it up a little bit. Register the user, and now I can log in as user 2, and what I should see is a blank list. So I'll add something. Now users should, if this works correctly, each have their own list. So here's users 2's list that he's managing, but I can log back out and log back in as user, and I should see the grocery list that we had before. And if I Yep, so just to show what Jen explained, when you actually register people, by default, the backend services will actually automatically send out emails to that individual so that you don't have to write that sort of functionality yourself. It'll send up account verification emails, so configurable with this template, basically giving people a URL to confirm their email address. It has a password reset workflow, which we'll actually look at momentarily, and password change functionality. But kind of cool that you don't have to, especially for simple apps, if you don't want to write any of this stuff, because it's a complete pain to have to integrate this sort of workflow, send out emails, it's a whole new can of worms. So we'll handle all that simple workflow for you. I'd have to look to answer that question for you. All right, so password reset is the next thing I'm going to add to this. And I'm going to head back. Where did I go? So I'm going to go through this one kind of quickly because it's going to be the same basic thing. I again have another view tied to my backend. Quick little, all I need to reset my password is an email address, so that's the only thing that's in this form. And then I'll toss one final observable into my JavaScript here. And when I load this up, oops, I forgot to add the link. That's what I'm looking for. So all I'm doing here is giving people a link so that they can go have some place to forget their password and use my Gmail before. And so what this will do is it'll actually send an email to the registered email account. It'll send the person a URL that they can use, a URL that backend services generates, just a quick, what's your new password, confirm your password type thing, so that they can send it and you don't have to wire any of that up yourself. Now, if you don't want to use any of this, if you're in a situation where you're at a company and you have to have all of this under your control. Like, you don't have to use any of this functionality to use our backend services. I mean, by all means, feel free to use your own user management system. I find that I use this a lot for especially like quick and dirty apps where I just need to spin up some user management really quickly. It works really well for that. I mean, I threw this together in a half hour or so. It's pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any other questions about this, about how any of this works? Yep, so it's at bit.ly-bg-day-2. Yep, and it'll also be available within the platform itself soon. This is kind of an early preview of something that's going to be integrated directly into this screen here, so coming soon. And we're going to have 2 or 3 other ones in there as well if you're curious and want to look through it. So those are really the 2 apps. Did anybody have any other questions that they wanted to ask about really anything at this point? No? Yeah. Yep. It is not jQuery Mobile. It is CandyUI Mobile. So CandyUI Mobile is kind of inspired by the declarative markup portion of jQuery Mobile. So it really borrows heavily off of the data dash configuration to build your widgets, configure them, and that sort of thing. And there's also a jQuery plugin behind each of those widgets, which is also very jQuery Mobile-esque. But CandyUI Mobile is really designed for hybrid apps, like specifically for hybrid apps. So the list view does a number of things for, like, implements scrolling in JavaScript for performance reasons to make things like pull to refresh possible. The scrolling list also does some, like, basically it's using WebKit transform or CSS3 transforms to build the list for performance reasons. The transitions are optimized with CSS transitions as well. Actually, one thing that's very new but very cool, so I will show you. See how well our search works. So we just unveiled this native page transitions plugin, which is pretty slick because you get to tie your hybrid app into the metal, basically, the native transitions available. And we have now, I've yet to try this, so I can't tell you how well this works, but we now have an adapter for CandyUI Mobile, which is kind of slick. So you just add the adapter and the transitions with your app, within your app are native transitions. It's slick too because the way this works, it's kind of a fun engineering thing, because to actually get this to work, the app takes a screen. So when you say, I want to transition to like page 2, so you pass this thing in href, and you say, I'm going to pound page 2. So before it starts, it takes a screenshot of what you're currently looking at. And then it does the navigation kind of behind the scenes. And the actual transition that happens from the screenshot to the newly navigated view. And that's how it makes that sort of thing possible. And it does, like, so it has some configuration so you can kind of like toss it, like, say what delay, because it tries not to like get you in this intermediate state where like you transition to something that's still transitioning, which would be kind of weird or like kind of loading at the same time. So it tries to be smart about that, but so. So yeah, so basically there's 2 real ways, at least visually, you can use CandyUI Mobile. You can use kind of the native-esque themes, which will try to do some things to look somewhat like the native platform, like this looks kind of like iOS. We try not to mimic it exactly, because like you get into this weird feeling where the app feels kind of fake, but we try to like be more inspired by the platform. Or we have a couple themes that just, and I was using the flat theme, that just say you're going to get the same thing across devices. And that's what our flat theme is for. By default, it does that. I'm personally a fan of the flat theme, which is why I used it. But the default is actually, it'll sniff and try to be intelligent about that. You can. You can, yes. There's some things that are weird, like it expects touch to be available. So like the scrolling lists are kind of weird with the mouse. It's configurable, but the default really expects you to be on a touch device. So you can configure it to use native scrolling, but by default, it's going to expect you to basically have a thumb to be using to scroll the list. So it's really intended for mobile apps, but you can use it to build mobile websites, and people have done it. Actually, if you go to... It is, yeah. So if you go to cuteness.io, this is a little Kenda UI mobile app that our engineering team put together if you just want to play around with it on your phone. So, and this is a web app, so this isn't running in a Cordova shell. So you could try it out. But you can see that like I'm trying to scroll here and it's not doing it because it actually wants me to put my mouse down and get the momentum scrolling behind it. Like I said, you can make it work, but it's really intended for the hybrid use case. Any other questions? Anything at this point? All right, so thank you very much. So I'm TJ VanToll, Jen Looper back there. Feel free, we're going to be around for the entire event. So any of the questions that I couldn't give you good answers for, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or just find me around this event. So thanks.